There's a moment near the end of Rick and Morty Season 9, Episode 10, where Morty does something so cold, so calculated, that even Rick doesn't have a joke for it. For 10 seasons, Morty has been the victim. In this episode, he becomes the villain. And by the time the credits roll on Field of Dreams, you'll realize the show just quietly rewrote everything you thought you understood about who these two men actually are. Let's start with the title itself, because it's not random. Field of Dreams borrows its name from the 1989 Kevin Costner film about a man who builds a baseball diamond in the middle of nowhere, chasing a dream that doesn't fully make sense to anyone else, hoping it'll bring back something he lost. That's not a coincidence. This episode is about chasing something you've already lost and slowly realizing you can't build your way back to it, no matter how many dimensions you're willing to burn down trying. It's also worth noticing what this episode doesn't do. Almost every Rick and Morty episode title is built around a pun, usually smashing the words Rick and Morty into some other pop culture reference. This one doesn't. That's rare. And when the writers break their own pattern like that, it's usually a signal that something bigger than a typical adventure of the week is about to happen. The episode opens somewhere else entirely, in a version of the multiverse where an alternate Rick and Morty have just died from eating chili that was too spicy. Their whole family goes with them. Jerry is on fire. It's absurd, it's fast, and it's the kind of gag the show has trained you to laugh at and move past. Except this time, that death isn't just a throwaway joke. It's the mechanism that introduces a brand new piece of Rick and Morty lore, the multiverse estate sale. Here's how it actually works, and it matters, because the rules of this concept quietly explain the entire emotional arc of the episode. And estate sale in this universe only triggers when an entire family dies at once. Not one member, not two, all of them. If a single Rick or Morty dies, you get a funeral, nothing more. It's only when a full family line is wiped out that the surviving multiverse of Ricks and Mortys gets to descend on their belongings like vultures at a garage sale, sorting through their books, their gadgets, their private lives, for the strange and the useful. It's a detail that sounds like world-building trivia at first, but stick with it, because by the end of this episode, that rule is going to come back around and hit you a lot harder than you expect. At this specific estate sale, our version of Rick, the one fans usually call C-137, brings his Morty along. And based on the way Morty reacts, wide-eyed, curious, slightly out of his depth, this appears to be his very first time experiencing one of these events. Around them is a parade of alternate Ricks and Mortys that only a show this unhinged could dream up. Ninja Ricks, a Morty whose head has been grafted onto a robotic body. One-eyed monster versions. Old CRT television Ricks and Mortys, boxy heads and all. A Rick who looks suspiciously like the little green aliens from Toy Story. Fish versions. Lucha Libre wrestler versions. It's chaos, and it's meant to be chaos. Because underneath the sight gags, the show is quietly asking you a question it's going to spend the rest of the episode answering. If there are infinite versions of your family out there, some better, some worse, some almost unrecognizable, what does that actually mean for the one version of your family you're stuck with? Morty doesn't sit with that question yet. Instead, he gets distracted, the way any teenager would, by another kid his age. This Morty has sunglasses literally fused into his eye sockets, and he introduces our Morty to something called funeral hopping. The concept is simple and, on its surface, kind of thrilling. If you've got access to a portal gun, why not hop between dimensions, drop into other families' lives, and see what it might feel like to belong somewhere else? This alternate Morty even has his own device for it, something he calls a Portal Gun Jr., and through him, our Morty gets his hands on a portal gun of his own for the very first time in the episode. That single object, small, easy to overlook, is about to become the engine that drives Morty into some of the darkest territory the show has ever put him through. And once he starts hopping, he isn't going to want to stop because the first family he stumbles into isn't just better than his own. It's about to convince him that his real family was never good enough to begin with. Back home, in what fans call the Parmesan dimension, Rick is dealing with a much smaller obsession. He's bought himself a motorcycle, not because he particularly needed one, but because he wanted an excuse to use a rotating display stand he'd picked up. Morty even calls him out on it directly, asking if the motorcycle was really just an excuse for the stand. It's a throwaway joke on the surface, But it's also doing something clever, because it's Rick, in his own oblivious way, admitting that he chases meaningless obsessions just to feel something. That's going to matter later, because Morty is about to do the exact same thing on a much larger, much more destructive scale. And then Rick says something that functions as the thesis statement for the entire episode, even though he doesn't realize it in the moment. He calls out Morty's interest in funeral hopping before Morty has even really started doing it, essentially predicting the exact trap his grandson is about to fall into. It's one of those lines that barely registers on a first watch and then becomes impossible to unhear once you know where the episode is going. Rick, of all people, sees it coming. And Rick, of all people, does nothing to stop it because on some level, he already knows Morty has to learn this lesson the hard way, the same way Rick probably did once, a long, long time ago. So Morty starts jumping. And each stop is a fast, brutal little punchline about how many ways a Morty can die across the multiverse. In one dimension, everyone has tiny torsos balanced on impossibly long legs, and this version of Morty died because his Rick got drunk and microwaved him. In another, Morty was burned to death, and pops up out of the ground like literal toast whenever he's needed. In another, an entire family is living inside a simulated reality their Rick built in the garage, never leaving, running through a shelf full of pre-programmed life scenarios instead of dealing with the real world at all. There's a dimension where crows are picking apart Morty's corpse. There's a Frankenstein's monster dimension where the family's version of an estate sale is literally distributing pieces of their dead Morty to other Frankenstein families. There's a dimension where everyone's aesthetic is beautiful and glossy, except their culture's idea of death is inflating people like balloons and letting their bodies rot in the sky forever. It's overwhelming, and it's meant to be. The show is rapid-firing these deaths at you specifically, so you feel the same numbness Morty starts to feel. When death becomes something you can just replace by jumping to the next universe, it stops meaning anything. And that emotional numbness is exactly the headspace Morty is in when he lands somewhere that finally looks like an upgrade. He meets a version of himself, simply called Mort. Mort is popular. Mort is athletic. Mort is smart, respected, seemingly adored by a version of his family that actually shows up for him. For a moment, it looks like Morty has found exactly what he's been searching for, a life where he isn't the family screw-up, isn't dragged into trauma every week, isn't quietly abused by a grandfather who treats him like an expendable tool. There's a reason this family has never seen a version of themselves like Rick before, never dealt with any multiverse chaos at all. Their Rick got sober 17 years earlier and walked away from all of it. Morty has to explain the entire concept of alternate dimensions to them from scratch, because to this family, none of this has ever been real. And that's the moment the show quietly slips something enormous past you, dressed up as a small character detail. This family has never experienced the horror Morty's family has normalized. They've never watched someone die and come back. They've never had their reality torn open by a portal gun. Which means everything they are, their warmth, their success, their seemingly perfect dynamic, was built without any of that damage. It sounds, for just a moment, like proof that a better life really was possible all along. Proof that Rick, and by extension, everything Morty has been forced to live through, was never necessary in the first place. But if you know this show even a little, you already know that feeling isn't going to last. Because Rick and Morty has never once let a perfect family stay perfect for long. And the deeper Morty gets pulled into this new life, the more small cracks start showing in the polish, cracks that Morty is too desperate, too emotionally starved, to actually notice until it's far too late. The truth starts to surface at the family's remote cabin during what looks like a perfect father-son night between Morty and this version of Jerry. It's warm. It's easy. It's everything Morty never gets at home. And then, in one sharp turn, Jerry snaps the portal gun in half and shows Morty exactly what he actually is underneath the charm. Not a loving father. A predator, wearing a loving father's face. Morty runs, and in running, he stumbles onto the truth about what really happened to Mort, the golden version of himself he'd been so desperate to become. Mort didn't have a perfect life. Mort tried to escape this family too, and it got him killed. The better version of Morty's life was never real. It was a mask, and underneath it was something far worse than anything his own dysfunctional family had ever done to him. So Morty does the only thing he can think of. He goes looking for this dimension's Rick, the one who walked away 17 years ago, hoping the one person who might actually protect him is still out there somewhere. He finds him living an entirely different kind of life. Sober. Remarried to a fellow professor. Working at MIT. Lecturing on the idea that nothing in the multiverse ultimately matters, an idea that hits differently coming from a man who chose peace over chaos and never looked back. For a moment, this Rick represents something Morty has never seen before. Proof that Rick doesn't have to be the reckless, self-destructive force that's defined every version of their relationship. Proof that growth was possible. Proof that this family could have been saved from itself, if only someone had made a different choice a long time ago. And then Morty destroys it. Deliberately. He tells this Rick things designed to pull him back into old habits. He builds him a portal gun. He plants the idea that reality-hopping chaos is worth returning to, knowing exactly what that kind of power tends to do to a man like Rick. And piece by piece, this healed, sober, rebuilt version of Rick starts slipping backward, neglecting his wife, drinking again, chasing the exact high he swore off nearly 2 decades earlier. It's not an accident. It's not Morty being naive. Morty knows precisely what he's doing, and he does it anyway, because some part of him needs Rick to be broken and dependent, the same way his Rick has always needed him. It ends in disaster. A portal collapses. Nearly the entire family is killed in the aftermath, and the one member left standing takes her own life rather than face what's left. Morty is forced to watch, right down to the smallest, most gutting detail, an innocent creature caught in the wreckage, dying slowly in front of him while he can do absolutely nothing to stop it. And the instant the last member of that family dies, the multiverse rules from the beginning of the episode snap back into focus. A full family gone. Which means once again an estate sale triggers. Ricks and Mortys from across infinite realities start pouring through portals into the wreckage Morty just created, ready to pick through the remains of a family he personally destroyed. His own Rick shows up in the crowd. And when he sees what Morty has done, the sheer scale of the devastation, he barely reacts. No lecture. No horror. Just a shrug and a quiet "let's go home." Because on some level, Rick already knows. This isn't a tragic accident Morty stumbled into. This is Morty becoming exactly what Rick always was. Selfish enough to burn down an entire family in pursuit of something he wanted, and comfortable enough with that choice to walk away from it without looking back. Morty goes home and tries, quietly, to reconnect with his own dysfunctional, unglamorous, deeply flawed family. And it doesn't work, not really. But somewhere in that failure, he lands on something close to peace. This family, broken as it is still his. Still more honest than a stranger's polished mask. Still somehow worth staying for. It's not a happy ending. It's an acceptance of the truth this entire episode has been circling from the very first estate sale. There is no better family waiting in some other dimension. There's only the one you've got, and what you're willing to become to hold on to it. Then Rick wakes him up in the middle of the night for another adventure, exactly like he always does, and the cycle starts over, because that's the real horror at the center of this show. Not the death. Not the multiverse. The fact that Morty now understands exactly what Rick is, exactly what their relationship has cost him, and chooses to stay anyway. What makes Field of Dreams land as hard as it does isn't the body count or the multiverse chaos. It's the quiet, uncomfortable realization that Morty didn't survive Rick's influence all these years. He absorbed it. He became fluent in it. And the scariest part of the whole finale isn't watching him destroy another family to get what he wants. It's watching him do it and feel almost nothing and go home like it was just another Tuesday. That's not a kid caught in his grandfather's chaos anymore. That's a young man who's learned the family trade. If this breakdown helped you catch details you missed on your own first watch, do me a favor and hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel grow. Subscribe if you want more deep dives like this one every time a new episode drops, and drop a comment letting me know what you think Morty actually is now, still a victim of Rick's influence, or something far more dangerous. I'll see you in the next one.